My name is Tim Erickson. I work with a small Drupal shop, which is mostly me and often on contractors. I have one contractor that kind of works with me steady. I do most of the front end work in our shop. My colleague does most of the back end. And we're going to talk about Gulp today. I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of how I got here. Part of the reason for this session for me was I once got the advice that if you want to learn something better, propose a session on it, get accepted, and then you got to learn it. I had already started the process of trying to dig in. Actually, one of the things that I've told some of the people in the audience already was that I had been installing, or I had some themes that used Gulp. The Gulp was already installed, the rules were all set up, and every time I ran Gulp, it went through this whole list of things, and it's creating a style guide, it's doing all of this linting, it's generating all of these errors, but then as long as my Sass was compiled, I was happy, and I just ignored the rest of that. And I was satisfied, and at some point I decided, this is silly. I either should understand what it's doing here and take advantage of the warnings it's giving me, or I should turn them off if I'm not going to use them. And I'd like to understand better how Gulp is working. So I started to sort of dig into what Gulp does and how it does it. And I thought other people would be interested in that as well. So that was the basis for this session. So it sounds like everybody here probably is aware of these tools, but some of my goals were just like, if you don't know about this, teach you about it. If you know about it but don't know how it works, to maybe demystify it a little bit. Working in a very small shop, it's not uncommon for me to cut and paste code and not always understand what it's doing, or to use tools that I don't fully understand. And it's nice to sometimes step back and sort of demystify and understand those tools better. Excuse me, why did you jump slides? I'd like to keep this informal, so if anybody has please interrupt me with questions or comments, and if we verge a little into other front-end tools, that's okay with me too. I'm hoping to learn some things from you guys today too. We can skip. We did introductions for those who are listening. We did introductions beforehand. We have a small audience. Everybody knows what Gulp is. Well, yes, and two of our people have used it. We have at least somebody who's not used it. But the basic definition of Gulp, or what Gulp does, is automate painful and time-consuming tasks. So, is it fair is Gulp a task runner? Is that the term for it, I think? Gulp basically just is a way to automate a bunch of tasks you do in your front-end development. I primarily used Gulp. I mean, the biggest thing for me was compiling my Sass. It's a way to automatically compile my Sass. Actually, sort of how I got to Gulp was, well, I do a lot of front-end work. Early on in my Drupal career, I just started using the Zen theme. And if any of you built a theme from scratch, or do you normally work with sub-themes that already exist?
Something.
You start with some, like a starter theme.
Create a sub-theme.
How about you? Have you ever created a theme?
I've done it both ways.
Done it both ways.
Yeah.
So for a long time, I settled on Zen really quickly because it was recommended to me. And when you sub-theme with Zen, it gives you this whole starter pack with a whole bunch of tools in there. And it does, it had Zen grids, things like that. Originally, the first versions of Zen I didn't use Sass at all. Once, as Zen progressed to Zen 0.5, they had Sass and they had Compass built in. So I just followed their instructions to use Compass to compile my Sass. And then I was a little frustrated in 7.6 because I just got used to Compass, and then they stuck Gulp in there. But I just started running the commands in Gulp, in Gulp, and it did what I wanted. And that's actually that theme that I showed the GIF from is a Zen theme, and that was using the Gulp configuration that came with Zen. What happened was I got into Drupal 8, and the Zen theme wasn't there. I wanted to use Bootstrap. Bootstrap didn't, I think at the time, didn't have Gulp. Now I was used to using Gulp, but it wasn't built into the theme. And so suddenly it was like, oh, I have to figure out how to install and add Gulp to a theme. Also, I started doing some work in Backdrop, and I had really the same problem there. In the Backdrop landscape, none of the themes at this point come with like Sass set up for you or with Gulp in it. So if you want to use the tool, you actually have to configure it yourself. And it's not that big a deal, but the first time you do it, it's a bit of a challenge.
Some of the things do use Sass though in Backdrop, right? Like Foundation.
That's possible.
You might have to set your Gulp up, but
sure.
Because there are, I think you can compile stuff.
I shouldn't have said that none of them do,
Yeah.
but the ones that I was interested
Okay.
in didn't.
Gotcha.
So it could be that there was one. It also could be that some of them use Sass, but not
Yeah.
Gulp. I know I had a conversation with Jen, and I think she doesn't actually use Sass.
Yeah,
Um,
right. She said she would like using it.
Right. But anyway, so I had to, I wanted to use Sass and the Drupal. And, the main reasons I started to dig deeper was to be able to add Gulp and Sass to my own projects and to get rid of that mess, which is what I jumped ahead and showed you, like having all this stuff go by. Either get rid of it or understand it and use it better. These are actually the first one link here. The second link I added quickly because it was a tutorial to help solve a problem, which I'll mention later. I haven't actually used that tutorial yet, but the first one is a link to this web page. Oh, I could actually do the. Present. There we go. This is a really nice article about that walks you through setting up your own Gulp in a Drupal 7 theme. And there's an updated version of this that he links to for Drupal 8. Although I don't think there's much difference. I wouldn't imagine that there is. I use the same for Backdrop. Backdrop is very close to Drupal 7, so okay, I'm trying to scroll down this web page, but that's not going to work, is it? On a screenshot. So, but I do have the no, I'm sorry. There we go. Now I'm back here already. I do have this, and if you scroll through this article, I mean, it literally gives you like each of the if you don't, fully understand how to install something like this, it walks through like even installing Ruby so that you can use npm. Gulp is managed by npm, the Node Package Manager, which is basically like Composer for Node modules, right? Mm-hmm. So that's the way I think about it. When you install Gulp, when you initiate npm, so one of the steps is initiate npm, and when you do that, you guys, I imagine, are both pretty. Or do you use npm much at all?
Exclusively to run Gulp tests.
So npm is a way to manage node packages, right? So you might use it for completely other things. What are other things that people use npm for? I've used it for.
Well, if you were building your entire app in Node,
Sure.
then you would use it almost exactly like Composer.
I'm trying to think of other reasons I would have used. I've never built anything in Node, but I've used npm to install other sort of tools. So some sort of dev tools on my website.
Well, you know, you can do auto previews, like live preview,
Sure.
where Node will make a change and browser, it automatically shows it. And that it's much faster in Node than in Ruby.
So there are some developer tools that you might want to use that are managed by NPM, like a Drupal 8 module would be managed by Composer. So in Drupal 8, you'd say Composer install this module. If you want to install some of these tools, like Gulp or other tools, you'll say NPM install. And Node or Gulp is a task runner that runs a bunch of other really plugin, I don't know what you call them, plugins or modules, really modules, some of which would run independently. You don't need Gulp to run them, but what Gulp does is automate them, right? So instead of, I might have a linting module, a prefixing module, and a Sass module, and I could probably manually run each one of those individually, but what Gulp does is it automates that. So you run one command and it does all three of them. And so you use NPM to install all of these modules. So when I do NPM init, it creates the way, I won't go deep into Node Package Manager, but if you're using that, you have to have a package.json, and this keeps track of all of the, like your config file for the Composer file would keep track of all your modules that you need to update. This keeps track of the Node modules that I'm using. So I'm using, like in this particular, if I just install Node and then run Node or npm init, it's going to create this file, but it won't really have any dependencies yet. And then I add each module, and as I add each one, it gets added to the package JSON file. So I've added, in addition to Gulp itself, well, I'm looking, when I said before, some of these would run independently. I'm looking at these. Most of these are Gulp modules, so they're specifically designed to work with Gulp. I do have one, which is SassLint. SassLint, I ran it, doesn't require Gulp at all, but then there is a Gulp SassLint, which is what allows you to use SassLint in Gulp. So I had to download both of those modules. So after downloading all of these modules, I then have this file. I can pass that, I can commit that file to Git, right, and other developers can then mimic my work environment by just running npm install, and it will use the package.json file and download all the same.
So is the auto prefixer for browser cross compatibility? Is that
Yes, it is, and I'm going to actually show that in a minute. Browser sync is the one I probably. Oh, this isn't. Actually, these are the ones I've installed down here. Child process was one I was told to install. I'm not 100% sure what that one does, but we've got the prefixer. Like post CSS, I think is required by the Sass to generate and sort of manage the CSS in your file. The Sass lint is linting your Sass. Does everybody know what linting is?
Yeah.
Right? Well, in case anybody listening doesn't, linting is checking through your Sass for formatting and best practices. And we'll see an example of that in a minute. Source maps. I'm just going to I'm going to show that in a minute. Gulp Watch, Sass, and SassLint. So these are all pretty straightforward. There's a lot of other modules you can add, and maybe later we'll talk a little bit about some other things you can do with Gulp that we're not going to cover today in detail. So that's your package.json file. Let me go back to my. So here's a list. You know what? I'm just going to leave it like this. Here's a list of some of the things that you can do with Sass that we've talked about already. You can compile your Sass. You can aggregate your Sass and CSS into one big file. So, for example, you'll see in a minute I have a whole bunch of individual Sass files broken down into components. But when I compress it into CSS, it aggregates that all into one big CSS file. Compressing and minifying your CSS and minifying your JavaScript can be done with Gulp. Optimizing your images I'm guessing that Zen has that built in. I haven't configured that myself yet. Checking for style errors in your Sass, that's basically linting. Building a style guide, I'm not going to do today, but it is something I have done with Gulp. I might at least show you how that works if you haven't done that before, if we have time. So getting started, actually I think okay. I am not sure why that slide isn't working, but I'm not going to worry about it because that slide is basically this page, which I'm going to try and make bigger. Oops, dang it, made it smaller. Oh, bear with me 1 second. Go themes. Oh, how do I make my text bigger? I'm just trying Command plus. That's not working. I'm trying.
You can switch to icons. That might be bigger. Just go to View and Icons. That's just bigger icons. It's not
Yeah,
big
I
text.
like the list, but it was bigger just a minute ago. Under View, show View. View. Oh, here we go. Well, that's limited. I can make it a little bigger. And then I think if I did that, that made it bigger. Okay. Well, it's not great, but it's a little bit better. So this is, for this demonstration, I created a brand new, I'm actually using Backdrop today. I hope nobody minds. Everything we're doing would be exactly the same in Drupal 7, and I think almost probably exactly the same in Drupal 8. This is a sub-theme of the basis theme that would come with Backdrop. Be the same as, pretty much the same as sub-theming a Drupal theme. It has the same files. But I added my own, and I'm not going to walk through this. I basically installed Node, and that gave me the Node modules folder. That's where all of my Node modules are going to go. I did Node init, and that created the packages.json file, which is actually the file I already showed you. We looked at that already. The instructions on how to configure Sass for Drupal said that I should create this little .npm.rc file and add one little line of text into it. And I'm not, well, I can show you that quickly. If you, there was like 2 custom things that you had to do for Drupal 7, like one change you had to make to the package JSON file. I can't tell you exactly why you need to make that change, but it's right here in the instructions. And then I had to add this other file that with some custom config, and again, I'm not exactly sure what that's doing, but I don't think it's that important. So that file I just made. The sass.lint file we're going to look at in a minute. This is my custom, the rules that I want to enforce. So I can configure when it's checking my Sass for style and best practices. I can say what I want it to flag as an error or a warning, and modify that. And then I had to create my Gulp file, and this is mostly what we're going to look at today, because this is how you configure and make Gulp bend to your will, is through the Gulp file. So those are the only things I've done. I guess the other thing I did do is I created a Sass folder and a CSS folder, and I'll show you in a minute what we've done with that.
Could you show the Sass lint YAML file?
Yes, I'm going to.
Okay.
If you can hold on a minute.
Sure.
We're going to actually open that up, and we're going to make a change. So my plan, I feel like just walking through and telling you everything it could do, I mean, actually to do some of this stuff and see how the file works, to me, is what was really exciting about this. And So, I'm sorry, I'm jumping around a bit here. So let's go to, let's jump into the Gulp file and look, and I had some slides that everybody can read that pretty good, can't you? Good. I had some slides of individual components to make them more legible, but we're just going to look directly in the Gulp file. And I'm actually going to, in the Zen theme, really briefly, they have a little bit more advanced Gulp. And, you know, the Gulp file, this is all JavaScript. I guess I know a little bit of JavaScript, but I'm not a JavaScript expert. But you can, I think, you know, create very custom sort of behaviors in your Gulp file using JavaScript. Yes. And that, you know, the Zen has some more advanced sort of logic and magic going on in their file. We don't need that. We can do a lot without that. So I'm going to go back to this is the one I created. The first thing I'm doing, and this is closer to what we're looking at, is closer to the way that blog post set up the file and a lot of the examples I've seen. So the first thing is you want to sort of declare and create variables for each of the plugins that you're going to use. So Gulp browser sync, I don't know if I started to mention that. That's the one module. It does things like when you save your Sass and compile it, it will like automatically open up your browser, and it does some nice things that I haven't paid too close attention to today. We're going to kind of skip over that. But the main components of a simple Sass file are really just declaring which modules you're going to use, and then creating tasks. And you can create then, and then really creating tasks. And basically, a really simple, you know, gulp.task, and then the hello here is the name of the task that you would call. So I've created a hello world. I'm calling it the hello Florida function. I can go to the command line now and say gulp hello. Oops, spelled it wrong. And now I'm using, you know, Gulp doesn't have to do useful things for you. It can do silly things too. But I'm using Gulp to just create a little message. I suppose this could be useful for, especially if you're debugging your Gulp file, or to just learn about it. To me, it was just helpful. Again, any kind of hello world is always helpful for me to prove that what I'm doing is actually having the impact I want it to. So that's the most basic thing. The next thing we're going to do is a little bit more complicated. Just compile the Sass, right? And so I think you also said you use Sass. You use Sass, right? So I have the first thing. I mean, you know, one of the things we can do with Sass, right, is I can create a whole bunch of individual contact. I know that there are kind of organizational ways that people organize their components. I'm a little bit of a freelancer here. I've just made up some of my own organizational structure here for some Sass files. So I have a contact, an FAQ. Maybe not the best practice for a lot of themers, but for our purposes, I think it's going to work fine. I have a little bit of CSS in two of these files, really. Most of them are empty right now. But one of the magic things is that I have not magic, I'm demystifying it. I have a styles that imports all of those different components. And then that's what it takes it basically bundles all of the Sass from all of those different files and puts it into one CSS file at the end. So I was going to, I'm going to open up and I'm going to delete this. I'm going to delete my CSS from the style sheet, and I could even delete, in fact, why don't I do that? I'm improvising now, things can go wrong. I'm going to try something and hope I don't regret it. I'm going to delete those CSS files, go back to here and do gulp simple Sass. And basically now I'm just calling can I skip away from that? Okay, I'm going to go ahead. I had the style sheet, so if I reload it, you'll see that it now compiled all of my Sass into CSS. And it generated the file for me. Right, if we go in the gulp file, so by running simple Sass, I have to define where my main Sass style sheet is. That's the one that imports all of the subfiles. So gulp goes to that one file, pulls in all of the Sass, it runs it through the module, and then it creates a CSS file. All that did now was created the CSS. If we want to, another thing that Sass does is auto prefix, right, for browser compatibility. So I've created another gulp task, and a very uncreatively named it Sass test 1. And what that does is it's going to take the same Sass, and it's going to, I can configure, you'll see right here, it says last 15 versions. That was kind of the default I cut and pasted. I think most people would probably narrow that down a little to 2 or 3 versions. You can set some rules about what browsers you are concerned about. I'm just going to leave it the way it is. And we notice there is no, in our style sheet, I know that's hard to see. Here we go.
I need to click into the file. It's no.
Oh, why is it? It's making the bottom bigger.
Yeah.
I mean, I've made it bigger in other windows for some reason. And I'm okay. You don't need to read the CSS here. I think you can see that there's no prefix in here, and you'll certainly notice in a minute. So if I go to, it was gulp. I named this awful gulp. Didn't I do like Sass test 1? Yep. So I run Sass test 1. Now if we go back and we open up our style sheet, you'll see that all the auto prefixes have been added. We can combine these, so you don't have to do each one individually. I'm breaking them out just for illustrative purposes, right?
If you run gulp watch, and you make changes automatically, can you set it so it does all that stuff?
Yes.
Just runs it all at one time without having to type every command in?
Yes. First of all, so there's we'll go ahead and just jump to that now. We're kind of jumping around anyways.
You don't have to.
Well, let's come to that, because I am going to talk about that. Gulp watch is setting it so that you don't actually have to run any commands. With gulp watch, gulp is monitoring your Sass files, and if it notices any changes in your Sass files, it's automatically compiling the Sass, and you can set gulp watch to do more than one task. So you can set gulp watch to compile your Sass, to auto prefix it, and do the linting all at once. You also set a gulp default command. You define one task as default, and then you just run gulp, and that does either one task, or you can also, some people don't like to use gulp watch. They don't want it to do it automatically. They want to just run gulp. So they might, create a list of 5 tasks that they want to happen, and they just type gulp each time they want to run those, and it does all of them. And we'll get to that in a second. We go back to the gulp file. Oops. So I actually made it got bigger here when I was trying to make it bigger in the other window. Source maps. Does everybody use source maps? Do you know what I'm talking about? So this was something that when I struggled with a bit. The first time I installed Gulp, I didn't know about source, that I had to do that, right? It was just there when I was using Zen. If we actually go to the website I'm working with, this is my backdrop site, and let's zoom this in a little bit. And if I just inspect an element, right? Right now it's telling me this is some, okay.
You might need to refresh.
Well, you know what, I have to clear the cache. So it's actually doing something I didn't want it to do yet. Here we go. So I think the problem is that the source maps are cached. I deleted the source maps, but Backdrop still knows they're there. So let's try this now. If I inspect this item, yeah. Okay, yeah, once again, trying to blow that up. Oh, there we go. So if we look at the source map, I have an H2A tag, and it's just telling me where that CSS is in the style sheet, but I'm managing my CSS in Sass. That's not helpful to me. I want to know which Sass file that I need to target. And to do that, I need to generate source maps so that the browser knows where all of the CSS was generated from, and there's a Sass plugin for that. I've already installed it and created a task, Sass source maps. So if we go to Gulp, Sass, this one's a little bit better named, and run Sass source maps. Again, I would never normally run these individually. We would automate these to run as a group. But now if I go back in the CSS folder now, we have an additional file called styles.css.maps, and it has a bunch of information in it. And now when I go to the browser, and I have to flush the cache for this, and it doesn't remember that I was zoomed in each time, but clear the cache and inspect. And now when I look at this little piece of the H2A, it tells me that is in the menu.scss file, and gives me a line number 12. So I can go right to the proper Sass file and edit that. Let's go back to the Gulp file, and let's do linting now. With linting, I'm going to go back up to the top. It required 2 modules. Okay. It required a Sass lint module, which is in my json.package file, but and it requires the Gulp Sass lint. So the Gulp Sass lint is what uses the other file within Gulp. Gulp only needs to know about the Gulp Sass lint, and then the other part is handled. So we can, we've been noticing when I run, I'm not getting any error messages or anything when I run Gulp right now, but if I run linting, is how I named that task. We do gulp linting. Here we go. It goes through all of my Sass and tells me if I have errors. So, like, one of the things it's checking is whether each file ends with a new line. I didn't know that was a thing that I had to do, but it's telling me that. It's giving me another error. It looks like I fixed some of the errors that I wanted to show, like a common kind of error that has come up for me in my Sass is that I will, often, oh, okay. So I think it works, but some people, according to the general rules for Sass linting, you should not put a unit on a 0. It should just be 0. It doesn't break your CSS or your Sass, but it's apparently not a good practice. It did not flag that, and it did not flag it because I turned it off in the Sass lint YAML file. So this is where I can configure what I want it to flag and how serious I want it to flag things. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time in this file, but the basics. We're starting on line 7. It has rules, and these are all the different rules. And the 1, 2, or the 0, all of the rules have a number, 0, 1, or 2. 0 means it's off, 1 means it's a warning, and 2 means it's an error, so how you want it to flag it. And I know from previous experience that the 0 unit is down here on line 102, and in preparing for the session, it was a 2, I changed it to a 0. That's why it didn't flag that problem. If I go ahead and change that to, well, let's change it to a 1 first. We do gulp linting. And now on my menu, I have a warning, no unit allowed for values of 0. I'll go back quickly and change that to a 2. And now it generated an error. So there's another thing I can do with this configuration. You can also tag certain lines. So for example, it did not flag this as an error here, even though I have another 0 with a PX on it. And it didn't because I added some comments in that says to basically list disable all. And so I can either, for example, if I inherit a whole bunch of Sass from another developer and I don't want to try and lint it or worry about it, I can just tell lint to ignore that chunk of Sass. With a starting line or an end line. So again, if I get rid of that now, it will check that and an error will be generated. I can also disable it for just a specific line. So if I just want Sass or Gulp linting to ignore this particular line, I do Sass lint disable line, and then I have to put. It felt to me like I ought to just be able to say ignore this line, but it actually made me add the particular thing that I wanted to check against. So if there were 2 things in here that were generating errors that I didn't want it to generate, I'd have to put the 2 different items. I'd have to list each thing. I guess that makes sense. It gives you finer control. Tell you what, I'll go ahead and delete these. I guess we might as well. Run it again, and now those 2 under contact now. All of those errors are showing up. They weren't the last time we ran that.
And
yep.
When there's an error, does it not compile the CSS file? Is it bailing on the whole process if there's an error?
No, it is.
It's linting, so I don't think it's.
It does go ahead. There is. There's a message at the end telling you how many errors it found. It does go ahead and compile it. In fact, let's just prove this. We're going to go into the cat's ID and change that to 20 and 0. So that's going to generate an error because it doesn't like that. But if I go ahead and run the linting, actually, just running this command might not even be compiling the Sass. It might just be doing the linting. But I'm going to check cats. Yeah, so it didn't compile it, but that's because I didn't run the Sass conversion. I just ran the linting. My recollection, we'll try it in a second because that is, I want to show how to combine them anyway. So I'll combine the linting and the Sass. And we'll see how that works. One of the problems I ran into when I first created my own gulp file was that when there was not a linting error, but when like my Sass was broken, which is different than a linting error. It's like if I just forgot a parenthesis or a close parentheses on a Sass command, that would actually break and I was running Gulp Watch. So I ran Gulp Watch. It's automatically checking for updates. And what I might, once I do that, I expect my Sass to get updated every time. And so I don't go look at I don't even go into the command line, right? I save my Sass, I go directly to the web page, and I expect to see my changes. And I wasn't seeing my changes, and I'd go back and change some of my CSS some more, and then it's still not seeing the changes. And eventually I'd realize that I had a broken tag somewhere, and Gulp had failed, and it crashed. And it wasn't compiling my Sass at all. And that didn't happen when I was using Zen, because Zen had some stuff written into the Sass file that would allow it to recover. So it would show you an error message saying you've got an error and your Sass is broken and you need to fix that. But it wouldn't stop compiling. And so I found some ways that I'm not going to show you today, but that's the kind of thing you can run into. I also had a problem that last night or the night before when I was preparing for this, where I was trying to auto-prefix. So right now, my CSS isn't auto-prefixed, but that's, again, I think I've recompiled the Sass without running the auto-prefixer. I was running a command that was supposed to be compiling and prefixing, but the prefixing wasn't happening, and eventually I realized that it's because Gulp runs your tasks concurrently, and the Sass compilation was
running before.
I think the prefix was finishing before the Sass compilation was, right? So it would prefix it, but then it would compile it, and the two didn't work together. You wanted to first compile the Sass into CSS, and then you wanted to prefix it, and it was doing the wrong thing first, so I wasn't getting my prefixing. And I found a way to, actually I'll show you. In my Gulp file, I created, I cut and pasted this from like Stack Exchange. So basically, I created a Gulp task called wait, and Gulp task.wait would run the simple Sass, which would compile the Sass, and then after that it would run the prefix. Okay. And prefix is also, I think, just a different task. So it would run the task sequentially. But then after I had done that, I mean, here's in Sass test 1. Sass test 1 is supposed to do both things. And it wasn't working, which is why I went and found that other solution. And then I ran Sass test 1 again, and it did work. So I think it was sort of arbitrary about whether or not, which finished first. And sometimes it worked, and sometimes it didn't, which is not a good. You want it to be consistent. So then having something like this thing down here is helpful. Oh, is it?
It's pretty close.
Oh, wow, okay. Well, the last thing, I can just show, the default task here, let's do this quick. This will be really fast. I can delete all my maps, delete all my styles, and in my Gulp.js, I've got the default task is if I just run Gulp. I don't give it any command, and then it's basically listing the other functions I want to do. So this one does linting, it runs simple Sass, it runs that wait command so that it'll be sure to run the prefix afterwards, and it runs the source maps. And so now if I just go here and I do Gulp, nothing else. We'll see that it did the linting. I see all the errors, but it also, if I go into the styles, oops, yep, here we go. Reload these pages. If I go into the styles, it's compiled my Sass, it's done the prefixing, and it's done the source map. And if I did the very last thing I won't actually run would be I have a Gulp task which is watch, and I can't explain exactly how this works, but basically Gulp watch is just watching my Sass files, and if they change, then it runs through all of those tasks automatically. So I don't even have to go to the command line; it just runs. So what I would do is I would go here and I would do Gulp watch, and now Gulp is starting to watch. And now if I save changes, it automatically does everything. So that's it.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Okay.